Welcome to part 3 of How to Find Peace with Food. And we'll begin with a little visual review of where we left off in part 2, which is namely contacting the vagus and really becoming familiar with the ventral and the dorsal vagal systems. So here's a little reminder of where we left off. The ventral part of the vagus is so much about regulation, co-regulation, connection, attunement. And really through this most recent in our evolutionary biology circuit of nerves, the ventral vagus together with other cranial nerves forms our ability to be able to really feel settled, to be able to deactivate when we've been in a stress response cycle, and really to be able to shift from fight, flight, or freeze into rest and digest. And you can see with our little furry friends here that this cozy place where you can really cozy up and rest and relax since our very first breath and since our very first minutes and hours on the planet has been about connection. And if you remember from part 2, the ventral vagus is not fully developed when we are born. The dorsal vagus and the sympathetic arousal system are. And we borrow our capacity to connect, regulate, calm down, settle, digest, integrate what's happened. We borrow that from our caregivers. Yeah. Now, we also spoke about the dorsal vagus. So the back vagal chain that modulates the freeze response and what allows us to really cover and really reserve and spare our resources at times of very, very high overwhelm and very high stress. And we also covered how the ability to self-regulate, the ability of the nervous system to come from activation into deactivation and into integration depends on first having that developed in relationship with the caregiver, which means that if we don't have that fully developed, if that relationship was not there, then our ability to come down from events that have us stuck in hyperarousal or our ability to come up and out of hyperarousal might be quite compromised, that the system on its own might not have enough resources to do that. And when I'm speaking about resources here, this isn't something that is intangible. We're speaking about electrical potentials, we're speaking about neural connectivity, we're speaking about, are these pathways developed, and can we also lean on what's been developed? And if not, how can we develop it in the present moment? So last time we finished with some practices that really connect with the ventral vagal system, with the safe and social system. You know, as I'm looking at this image of this young girl resting in a hammock, I'm reminded of how many of the students that come on a clarity call with me to see if my 6-month transformation group program is the right fit for them. And really on that call, we get into exploring what are the patterns that they're dealing with. How many of them share that they remember as early as 2 or 3 years old or 5, 6 years old, going to food or sneaking food or hiding food in order to find that place of ease and comfort and care inside themselves. Yeah. And for many of us, whether the patterns that have caused us suffering lean more towards restriction and then overabundance, or maybe it's just overeating or emotional eating when we're feeling overwhelmed, then our own capacity is really being overpowered by what's happening in life, that oftentimes we can go back to early infancy and find reasons for these later adaptations that we developed as children. And just to name that as something that is the creativity of the system, that the ventrovagal complex, the safe and social system, that bring us into the capacity to rest and restore our strength and recover, that they want that stimulation, and really that it's a natural conditioning that guides us towards these behaviors, and it's not some lack of willpower or not understanding. Really, it's about survival and about creating the oscillations in the system where we're not always stuck in the stress response cycle, but we can actually come out of it and rest and restore ourselves in every way possible, physiologically, emotionally, psychically, spiritually, because the body hosts all of our expressions as human beings. So just really how tender that is, this beautiful image of a child resting safely in the support of a hammock, that can only happen if they've been able to rest safely in the arms of another first. Yeah. And maybe this is a good time, if something about what I'm sharing is touching you, to bring a hand to your heart and one to your belly, and to just really feel your own warmth and your own touch and support in this moment. If you have a back of your chair, to just kind of lean in the back of the chair and let that support you and let that hold you. Or you might even want to pull over a pillow and hug a pillow for a few moments here. So really noticing the physical support of the environment and your own support for yourself. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the functions of the vagus. Yeah. And we have both sensory, motor, and social functions that the vagus is wiring us for. So if you think about the ventral vagus, that is really a part of the ventral complex of connection, that being online and having enough electrical activity moving through that part of the vagus really manages sensing the ear, swallowing, our airway and vocal cords. And you might have felt this when you're stressed out, that your voice changes. It helps control your breath rate and heart rate, blood pressure. It manages the activity of the liver, the emptying of your gallbladder. And as somebody who struggled with severe gallbladder pain for a large part of my life, it was such a relief that, that had an end at some point. It helps manage our experiences of hunger and satiety. It helps the pancreas release insulin and other digestive enzymes. It assists in gut motility and gut mobility. It supports immune system function. It's related to the management of inflammation in the gut, and it helps communicate from the microbiome to the brain. And these are just a fraction of the functions of the vagus. And so artificially, we separate the vagus into a dorsal and a ventral branch, the part that deals with digestion and the part that deals with sensing and communication and connection. But really, it is one big system that is really offering this vertical alignment where the body and the brain speak through it. It's a massive highway of information that all the time is letting us know, am I safe? Am I safe to swallow? Am I safe to breathe? Am I safe to digest? Am I safe to be here and be in connection? In the social functions of the vagus, we have connection, bonding, attachment, safety and security, empathy, and the connection through the mirror neurons. That I spoke about this earlier, I believe in part 1, where if someone is sad, that your own face makes a micro expression of that sadness as you relate through your own body in the attunement and in the relational space to what that person's feeling, but you can relate because you can feel it too. You might not know what it's like to be sad about a pet passing away, but you've lost people and you know what that sadness feels like. And so we are wired for connection with each other and for understanding and co-regulation through the ventrovagal complex, which includes the vagus and also other cranial nerves of social connection. So what can often happen, and it's kind of like rounding our review of the vagus from last time, what can often happen is when we're stuck in hyperarousal, and the electricity is really going towards the sympathetic nerves, and we're more in this fight, flight, vigilant, always on the go, relentlessly driven, charged mode, or the energy, on the contrary, is pulled and stuck down in the high tone dorsal state in our belly, and we don't have access to energy, and we feel kind of like lifeless, or we feel depressed, or we feel stuck, or we feel like there's no way forward, that really there's only so much electricity in your system. And both connection and digestion and everything that happens in the body, these are electrical events. And so if the electricity is moving through the sympathetic system or down into the dorsal system, it's bound and depressed into the dorsal system, then really we don't have enough going into the ventral system, into the nerves of the nose, cheeks, eyes, tongue, palates, throat, teeth, ears, and down into the lungs and heart. We really don't have enough going there in order to mediate the capacity to digest and the capacity to actually also know what signals are needing to travel up and down the vagus that mediate the feeding cycle. And so in part one, I spoke about this need that before a meal, I need to be clear that I'm hungry, and I need to know what I'm hungry for and what's going to satisfy me. Well, if my energy to sense that is bound somewhere else, then what I'm sensing is whatever the nervous system state is that is predominant in my body in the moment. So perhaps I'm sensing that it's important to move very fast, or it's important to think about a particular task that's at hand that I need to complete. Or maybe I'm shut down and I'm experiencing deep states of shame and guilt or regret. And so that's what I'm sensing. I'm actually not sensing anything about my meal. The same system that tells me that I'm well, that I'm relaxed, that I'm safe, and that lets me know whether I'm hungry or full, that same system also tells me things are not good right now. Here are the emotions that are present. Here are the sensations that are present. Here's what you need to be attending to. And if our home base, due to trauma, especially complex trauma, is that we're stuck in the hyperarousal or hypoarousal state, or a combination of both, because of what we had to do to survive, and our system still feels like the past is experienced in the present. It's not really past because the physiology still has the form of what it had to do to adapt to the past. Then the system is really doing to protect us and to serve us what it's always done best, to allow survival, instead of what it needs to be doing to let us know what the needs are of the moment, whether it's around food, whether it's around hydration, whether it's around rest and restoration, whether it's around taking care of some sort of a medical condition. These signals, hunger, satiety, pain, thirst, they're a part of the feedback loops that are put into our body so that we can have effective self-care in the moment. But if the system is actually wired for survival, this is not what we're hearing. We're not hearing these clear signals that tell me, what do I need? How much do I need? How do I get it and prepare it? Am I even free? Is the energy in my body free for preparation and obtaining of this food that I want? And then am I able to eat, enjoy, savor, and really feel satisfied by what I'm choosing so that at some point I can stop and I can move towards digestion? If the system is not open, if it's not a clear vessel for hearing these messages and really attuning to these feedback loops, then self-care becomes very difficult. And what many people do, and this is something that we really dive into detail at the beginning of the program that I teach, and my students are always just so shocked to find out what's happening inside, that if what I'm hearing are actually signals about self-protection, that signals about how to feed myself or when to rest or what project I have energy for, these really go on the back burner. And so what my students often will share is, oh, this is why I'm thinking so much. This is why I'm obsessing so much about what to do and how to feed myself and what is the latest and greatest approach. Because the feedback loops that are there, that are naturally conditioned in the body to give me that information, just like in the squirrels that are stealing from the bird feeder right outside my window right now, they know where the food is. Yeah. These feedback loops, they're naturally conditioned in the system. They're pre-wired in the system so we can have our needs met. That when we don't hear them, we're still trying to figure out how to meet our needs, but we're doing this cognitively. We're doing it through learning, through reading, through instruction, through asking others what works for you. Tell me what to do. In my 20s, I used to write a lot of meal plans for people, and people tell me, just tell me what to eat and I'll go eat it. But the issue with that is that that's based on an idea, not based on the somatic awareness and moment-to-moment feedback of the body, which might need one thing today and a completely different thing tomorrow. I might have had soup for dinner last night, but this morning my body wanted something heavy and dense. And so I had toast with brie, true story, and some salami, right? So really thinking about this, how often what we call the food noise, or people call having a food head, what we call the food noise, and in disordered eating, the eating disordered voice, the ED voice, that often that's actually just piled up on top of a body that's already struggling to do what is naturally programmed to do, because the electricity in the system is elsewhere and the priorities really self-protection, survival, and not thriving in the moment with the information that's here. I hope that that's landing. I've repeated it a few times because it's a lot to take in. And I know that whoever you are that is watching this, you've probably done a lot for your self-care by the time you've come to this workshop. So I want you to understand that if you're struggling with the adaptations to life overwhelm, whether things that happened to you or things that should have happened but didn't happen to you, and we call the adaptations to those trauma. If you're dealing with traumatic imprints in your physiology, if your nervous system has been dysregulated over a long period of time, that is best friends with reading and learning a lot about nutrition, because we're really trying to figure out a way into the system to meet a need that the response to is blunted and covered over and hijacked by the system. Yeah. So I want you to get very comfortable about reading your own body and understanding what it feels like when you're stuck in hyperarousal, what it feels like when you're stuck in hypoarousal. And there's a side-by-side green and purple, I believe, table in my book on page 18 with this, if you want to compare them side by side. And that table also is available for download on my website in the book resources. So when we get stuck in hyperarousal, it's very common to experience overwhelm. And overwhelm is just a kind of a cover term. It's the cover. It's like you have a notebook and that's just what's on the cover. It's a cover term for a lot of cycles of activation are happening in the system all at the same time. We might feel anxiety. At higher intensities, we'll feel panic. There's a sense of always being on the go, being restless. You know, the person that's always fidgeting or pacing back and forth, or the person that shakes the whole table at the restaurant with their leg. That's what we're talking about. Being vigilant, being easily startled, having an exaggerated startle response, working very hard because there's all this energy in the system that is looking for a place to go. Feeling under pressure. A lot of people will say, oh, if I don't get this done, it's never going to get done. Or if I stop pushing myself, everything's going to fall apart. It's a very common feeling in there. Oftentimes there's chronic pain because there's a lot of undigested life experiences that the body somaticizes. Then we can often have anger, or the opposite of that, which is the inability to connect to anger. So sometimes people are stuck in hyperarousal because they have anger, but the anger is covered over. And so they might always be crying because they feel overwhelmed, but under that, they might be angry. Lots of tension, physical, mental, emotional. Digestive issues are very common. And here with pure hyperarousal, oftentimes what will happen is the top of the digestive tract will become more limited. So you might feel like you have a pit in your stomach or you can't eat, but then the bowels will actually release. So you might have a constipation of tension and also diarrhea, or you might have alternating constipation and diarrhea, things that are very common for things like IBD, IBS. Yeah. Sleep issues, having a hard time falling asleep or falling asleep and then being woken up in the middle of the night by a body that's very active. And you might feel unsettled and have fear of connection, or your body just goes into higher arousal with connection. Also, goodbyes can be very, very difficult sometimes for systems that are stuck in hyperarousal, or getting yourself to get together with people can be very difficult for systems that are stuck in hyperarousal. And this can be all over the place. You have your typical type A person that's very go, 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 very rigid, almost OCD in the way of being, very uncompromising with very high standards, maybe goes jogging every morning, right? But they need to go jogging in order to keep releasing some of this pressure. And then every now and then they crash and eat half the refrigerator. You also might have somebody who's restrictive, incredibly restrictive, because there's fear of food. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. How we eat when we are stuck in hyperarousal can vary person to person. And really in individual work, we uncover just the patterns that hyperarousal is feeding. But here's some general observations that I have with my students. Very hard to feel what I want. Eating in order to suppress the emotions of fear or feeling threat. Compulsive eating or exercising. There's oftentimes fear of food and lots of rule-based eating. These foods are good, these foods are bad. There's a lot of phobias. Like if I was to eat something, that it's going to do this or that. Also, food can oftentimes be the enemy. Salt is toxic, sugar is toxic, this is toxic, that is toxic, because we're actually unable to identify where the threat of toxicity is coming from. This is very common in families where there was a lot of codependence or a lot of enmeshment, or also harm and abuse. Oftentimes there's binge eating. There's avoiding foods because every time that I eat, I actually feel more fear. There's chewing and spitting. Also, rumination is here, where somebody might throw up and then re-chew, re-ruminate, kind of like ruminating animals. That's where this word comes from, is bringing up the food that's already been eaten for chewing it again. And these things might sound like awful, but the reality is that they have a place in the regulation of the system because that keeps getting electricity into the ventral system. Eating until I calm down, which activates the cranial nerves. So if I can get the social engagement system, these nerves of social engagement, 5, 7, 9, 10, and 11, through chewing, through swallowing, through listening to the food, if I can get those going, then I can calm down. In the absence of connection with other human beings, in the absence of co-regulation, either because it's not available in the moment or because historically we go to things and not people because of our history. Yeah. Oftentimes eating is a reward here because the system is so tired from efforting that there's a need for reward and the need for some of the biochemistry that settles the system. So we can have behaviors that say, oh, I deserve this. And also for some people who grew up in very dangerous environments where hyperarousal was necessary, vigilance was necessary, who's at the door? Is dad coming drunk or sober today? That it's actually safer to be vigilant. It's safer to be on the lookout. It's safer to not relax. And relaxation and settling, going into rest and digest is actually what feels dangerous. And so not eating keeps the system on alert through the release of the HPA axis hormones all the way down to the adrenals. And so the system stays more turned up, more charged. We might even feel like we have better focus or we can work better. The reality is that in the background, that's very exhausting to the system. But in the moment, it feels like it's the most helpful thing because relaxing is what would have felt like threat in the past. And so we're living in the present with the adaptations of the past. I almost said with the adaptations of the fast because fasting falls in here as well. And there's a lot of spiritualizing of hunger that happens. When we get stuck in hyperarousal, we have the opposite experience where we might be depressed, numb, feel withdrawn. There might be lack of affect, kind of a flat face. There might be lots of sadness, despair, hopelessness, helplessness, the desire to isolate and not be around others, disconnection. And here is where we're going to often have poor digestion, constipation, a lot of bloating. Here's where oftentimes we have SIBO, candida, yeast overgrowth, often migraines and syndromes, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia fall in here. There can be low blood pressure with this and a lower heart rate. Oftentimes people might dissociate or have derealization, depersonalization here. And then these are the words of Deb Dana, who brought a lot of the polyvagal theory that this is based on to many of us who are practitioners, feeling alone, lost, and unreachable. Alone, lost, and unreachable. Oftentimes people will tell me, it's like my life is a movie, but I'm not in it. Or like everything is happening through plexiglass. Yeah. How we eat when we are stuck in hyperarousal. Really hard to feel what I want or need because everything's kind of numbed over. You might eat to feel real, grounded, and present. This is also where other kinds of self-harm, not just binging and purging or overeating or emotional eating, can happen. For example, cutting and other forms of picking at the body, chewing nails, pulling hair, where the behavior that's causing an uncomfortable sensation and pain, all the way to self-mutilation, that behavior actually allows us to come back into the body from the dissociation and to feel somewhat alive, even if it's through the painful experience. Activation and an arousal curve, right side of the hill of the body, even though that's on the unpleasant side, instead of interest, curiosity, excitement, exploration, it's pain, discomfort, frustration, that can make us feel still more alive because we're not so numbed out and like we're not here. Eating to have some energy, Sometimes people will graze in the freeze state, in the hyperarousal state, to have some energy. I've worked with people that all throughout the day eat 2 to 3 pounds of chocolates, just little pieces, just to keep themselves going with a stimulant. It can be caffeine, it can be energy drinks, it can be even healthy on the surface things like black tea or black coffee, just to keep yourself going. Not caring what you eat because of the numbness and dissociation, there's a separation from self. And so, yes, I'm harming myself, but so what? And there's actually a pleasure in the self-harm as well. Overeating. Also, there's eating to disappear and dissociate. There's kind of a blissed out state that we can come into that begins with kind of a small pleasure, and then eventually we are completely separate from what's going on in the moment. Also, oftentimes in hyperarousal, people will walk around with this long-standing adaptation of shame, toxic guilt that come from a feeling of I'm just flawed and bad inside, which is from early complex trauma, something that many of us walk around with. On the surface, it can be something like imposter syndrome, but deep inside is just really feeling like I'm bad at the core. And when I eat, and I eat in these ways that I don't like, that I judge myself and shame myself and guilt myself for how I'm eating, and I'm able to have a behavior that in some way explains that I'm bad. I'm walking around with this unexplained badness. But here, if I behave in this way, at least there's an explanation for why I feel bad. Shame on me. So disgusted by how I eat. So the feeling of I'm bad, I'm disgusting becomes about the food. It's very, very often. Out of body eating, sleep eating, eating to punish yourself. People often ask me, what about self-sabotage? That falls both in hypo and hyperarousal, because if the system has a preferred way of functioning for protection, the way that you're eating, and these are the words of one of my students, and he is so brilliant. The way that you're eating is a solution in the context of a hyper or hypoaroused system. And when we take the solution away, if your solution is eating or not eating, if we try to take that away, the reason why you're doing it doesn't go away, right? So that self-sabotage, what can feel like self-sabotage, is often just coming back into the old adaptation because you've taken a solution away without offering something else. And if you don't offer the system something else, then it's not going to have a new home base to go to. Which is why the way that we rebuild, rewire, and heal the system has steps. And I'm going to take you through those in just a little bit. I'm going to just take a pause here for a second, just for a sip of water. And while I do this, I invite you to think about behaviors that you perhaps have. And might they be coming out of hyper or hypoarousal? Perhaps both. Perhaps both. Yeah. So here's the thing. Stress is not new to our systems. Our bodies have always gone through stressful experiences. However, our bodies are also hundreds of thousands of years old, our human bodies, and they're millions of years old based on the evolutionary biology friendship that we have in how we're built with other species. And so while stress has always been here, our ancestors had ways, especially when we lived in more tribal societies, to complete the stress response cycle. My teacher, Steve Hoskinson, who created Organic Intelligence, says that if it wasn't for the agricultural revolution, we would be known as the singing and dancing species. And there's a way that when a member of the tribe would come back from something stressful, there was an audience for him or her to be heard. There would be people to receive the story. And maybe there was a special drink that they prepared that was healing with some herbs, or maybe there were some medicinal plants that were used to restore wholeness in that person who was stressed out or injured. Maybe a special piece of jewelry was made for them. Maybe a song was sang for them. Imagine if you came home from work after a stressful day and you had multiple people ask you, "How was your day?" And they actually had time to hear you. Wow, that sounds really difficult. Can I make you a cup of tea? I have this herb that really helps if you've had conflict. And can we just, I have my drums here. Let me pull out the drums and I'll drum a little bit and we can just shake a little bit together to the music. I mean, what would that be like? Right? Sometimes we experience that at retreat, but rarely in our day-to-day lives. Our ancestors knew how to do connection and co-regulation through facial expressions, through touch, through rhythmic movement, song and dance, through drumming, through making music, through laughing and crying together, and using both herbs and food in context, that they were ritualized. You can think of something like chocolate that in a cacao ceremony has a completely different meaning than it does when you are having chocolate in a traffic jam. Yeah, after a stressful board meeting. That ritual was a part of daily life. And being Bulgarian, I came to the United States when I was 31 and have lived, the majority of my life in another culture and full of very, very interesting rituals and full of a lot of still very ancient, all the way from pagan times, rituals to deal with stress. And it's very, very interesting that when there's something scary that happens, you're not left alone. You're not left alone, that there's a way that there's certain rituals that are made to energetically bring the body back into alignment. And so I've watched some of those rituals be very helpful. I've watched some of them be very helpful. Yeah. And it's really a fantastic thing that we have in our bodies the wiring to receive both stress and the deactivation, relaxation, digestion of the stressful event, and the integration and meaning making so that we can understand what this was about. Yeah. So I want to show you a little bit about the way that I work. I want to share a little bit about the way that I work with the nervous system in order to support people in really helping themselves out of these home bases of hyper and hypoarousal into a present moment fluidity so that the system can go up and down, up and down, up and down, but doesn't get stuck. And if it was stuck from the past, that there's a way to support it in the present. There are 3 phases in my work, and if one was to join a 6-month transformation group, we go through all these 3 phases, one at a time, and then together as an ever-evolving, feeding into each other's circuit. We begin by organizing the biology. We continue, now that the vessel is clear, with listening to the body's needs, and then step into the 3rd part of our work, which is finding true refuge. To organize the biology, there's a great deal of nervous system education, just like you've been receiving today and what I've laid out in my book, that is needed in order to start to understand what are the environmental influences from the outside and the inside that have made it necessary for your nervous system to respond in the way that it has. Doing that allows the left side of the brain to settle and to know that everything is logical, everything is organized, everything that is a dysfunction has a function that you haven't known about. And you can actually have the freedom to start to change some of the ways that you're thinking, believing, and holding what you're experiencing. Yeah. We pay a great deal of attention to somatic tracking and resourcing so that you know what is creating a present moment experience for your body through multiple channels of perception. What's coming in through the exteroception, what's coming in through the interoception, and how is the system organizing the channels of perception coming from the outside and the inside. And there's multiple of those. We work with cranial nerve integration and activation of the cranial nerves through specific body work techniques. And then we also work on this very important piece for the attachment system, which is differentiation. What is me and what is not me? Oftentimes, the biology is disorganized just by a sheer lack of differentiation because of early enmeshment or codependence or other events, relational structures, and ways that families function that had us a little confused about what's ours, what's not ours, and that it trickles all the way down to the cellular level. So really differentiation is a big part of this organization of the biology. To get the education, to learn somatic tracking and resourcing, to integrate the cranial nerves, and then to have the differentiation of what's me, what's not me, what's mine, what's not mine, what am I responsible for, what I'm not responsible for, where do I have agency here, right? Then in listen to the body's needs, what we do is we learn how to reconnect through the soma with current and unmet needs. We also learn how to work with different adaptations that make it really difficult to meet our needs. Because oftentimes, even if we're aware, we might have somatic barriers to meeting our needs. We work with establishing appropriate boundaries. And what's very exciting for me, reconnecting with life force and sympathetic energy. This is where we reconnect with healthy aggression. This is where we start to be able to really state what we want, what we need. And we're able to live life as adults on our own terms, but also in relationship with others. Yeah. And the last kind of phase of our work is finding true refuge. And this is really about being able to rest on an organized biology, on feedback loops that are coming through clear channels now that we're a clear vessel, so that we can have self-regulation and co-regulation and balance between the two. So we don't move between self-reliance, independence, or full dependence, but we can be co-regulating and self-regulating so we can come into interdependence, into an interpenetrating attunement with ourselves and others. Yeah. So that we can be also seen and witnessed in relationship. We learn how to stay in a form of support, and my group offers both group support and one-on-one support while we're learning. But then in the coming out of it, we have a large community of graduates that support continues to be given. And then the greatest gift of all, to arrive in the fullness of what it means to be an adult and be in adult consciousness, so that we can have a right relationship with self. And here, from this true refuge, we can actually relate to things that might have happened in the past, or things that were triggering, or things that were overwhelming, but we have capacity to meet life. And I would say that in the Find True Refuge space, we really see how we're living what we learned. And so this last piece here is an ongoing piece. I often tell my students that our 6-month program puts gas in your car. Where you're going to drive your car is entirely up to you. If you want to go up into the mountains or down towards the beach, but know that you always have good company to connect with along the way. I think this is our last slide. I would love to just pause here and say thank you. Thank you for making it to the end of this 3-part series. I know it can be quite a bit, and I hope that by pausing and going at your own pace, you've been able to really integrate and assimilate what was valuable to you. I would love to know what your takeaways are, what your powerful aha moments or insights are. So please feel free to comment here where this is hosted on Teachable, or send me an email. Send me an email anytime at galina@purebelonging.com. There's also a contact form on purebelonging.com on my website. You can always fill that out. It comes straight into my email. Thank you again. Let me stop the share for being here. Thank you for taking part in this 3-part series, and know that I'm deeply grateful to you for being willing to look at this different perspective, because this is a different perspective. It doesn't make everything else that you know redundant. I hope that it adds a layer under everything else that you know, and that it makes your path to peace with food that much more meaningful, so that you can include all of yourself. This 3-part series can stand alone. You can also combine that with my book. And if you are somebody who's ready for more and who really wants to get the support in learning this and really being able to shift and have your nervous system be a trusted friend and not something that's throwing you out into survival responses all the time, you are welcome to come in and work with me. We do a combination of group and one-on-one work that's quite in depth. And for that, you can apply on my website in Learn with Me. If you scroll down all the way down to the bottom of that page, there's apply for a 6-month transformation group, and you will come on a call with me. And at this point of recording this webinar, the calls are with me. Eventually, you might jump on a call with one of my team members and seeing really if the group is a right fit for you. And if not, I will make other recommendations. Sometimes people need body work, sometimes they need something else, depending on what they're dealing with. But if the 6-month group is a right fit for you, it'll be an honor to be your teacher. It'll be an honor to meet you. Sending you all love and care, wishing you peace with food, and I'm here for you when you're ready to reach out.